Well, let's get started because I think this is going to be a fun conversation. And so I'd love to spend as much time as we can. For those of you who have not joined one of these, first of all, my name is Radha Ruparal. I host these People First talks. And the People First initiative is a community of organizations and actors across sectors and around the world who believe in this idea that if we want to achieve sustainable development, we have to invest in leadership, and particularly in the leadership of those who are locally working to solve many of the challenges we have in the world today. And so we've been hosting these People First talks to learn from different members of our community who are taking on this challenge in different ways of how do we grow this leadership. To have with us Lam. Lam is, he calls himself a change agent, and I would agree. We're going to get him to introduce himself, but he grew up in Vietnam, spent his formative years in Brazil and France and US, has traveled to 130 countries, had a career for many years in private equity, and then went through a deep journey of inner transformation, and is now has a family foundation where he has supported many different organizations, many who have been on this call, Acumen, Ashoka, Endeavor, Teach for All, that are really investing in leadership development. And a lot of Lam's life work has been, how do we invest in growing a new set of leaders? And particularly, what's the inner work we need to do in order to grow the type of leadership we need in the world today? And so without further ado, Lam, I'm going to get into conversation with you. And like we've done in all of these talks, we really want this to be a conversation. So I'll ask Lam a few questions. But while we're chatting, if you have questions that you want to put into the space, please just put them in the chat and we'll bring them right in. So let's get started. Lam, welcome. It's so good to have you with us. I wanted to start by just asking you, I've shared a little bit about you, but tell us a little bit about your story in your own words.
Thank you, Radha. So as Radha said, I was a native of Vietnam. I left the country when I was 15. I finished high school in Brazil. Then I went to college, university in France, and then business school in the US. And by accident of history, I became first a refugee and a US citizen when South Vietnam collapsed in 1975. So since then, I've mainly worked in all my career. I retired 6 years ago, but all of my career I was working on what I would call the dark side in banking and finance. And today, I'm still trying to heal the wounds from that period, and to unlearn all the bad habits from that period of which is really about soul destruction. So 20 years ago, I went on my first Vipassana retreat. For those who are not familiar, this is a 10-day complete silent retreat. And at the time, I was living in circumstances that most people would consider desirable, with all the exterior signs of quote unquote success. Yet I felt something was missing, because 30 years in banking and finance, which is, as you know, especially in those days, a very white male environment. And here I was trying to struggle as a still a male, but somebody from Asia, and that was stressful. So 20 years ago, I was stressed, angry, arrogant, full of desires, and I felt empty inside. So I was looking for meaning. So I went on this retreat, and it was an awakening. It launched me on a spiritual journey. Since then, I meditate on a daily basis. I try to go on retreats at least once a year. I only read spiritual or spiritually oriented scientific books, and and I from a fervent believer in one religion, I became a man of all faiths and no organized religion. In fact, a bit allergic to organized religion. And from a mere what I would call a philanthropic funder. I become what I call an agent of change. And from the standpoint of a key operator in the market economy, I question its very foundations. So that is my spiritual journey. But the spiritual journey still continues. So 20 years later, at the beginning of last year, I went on a retreat with some of us here have gone on, and in India. And there I learned something else, which is awakening is, or consciousness has different levels. And with each level of consciousness, the ego, as you rise in level of consciousness, the ego um, gets smaller and smaller, but it's still there. And unless we can transcend the ego, the work is not finished. So I'm still on that journey.
Thank you, Lam. I mean, it's so I think so much of what you say resonates with what we've been thinking about in this community, but you're just bringing so much depth to it. The idea that leadership is about learning, but also about unlearning, right? So it's really around unlearning. And I think what you're saying is actually leadership is also about getting to some of the deeper root causes or, the systemic challenges that we're facing. So well, let's go into that a little bit more, and then we'll come back to your personal journey as well. But so you've now gone, so you worked in business for many years. You've now gone on this deep journey where you started actually questioning a lot of the paradigms around leadership and how we work together and how do we be together. Then you started supporting organizations, like a number of them, Acumen, Ashoka, Endeavor, that support leadership development. Tell us more about what had you channel your energy into this, and maybe a little bit about, you mentioned getting, leadership as a way of getting to the root causes. Tell
Mm.
us a little bit more about that.
Um, I think Radha and I have had this discussion before, but I do not like the word leadership. I think there are two words which are often misused and abused in civil society, and one of them is leadership, and the other one is philanthropy. Philanthropy, at its origin, means the love of mankind. But nowadays, it just means the act of giving money. And because of that, there is a relationship of power um, with the donor, the funder, thinking or importing into the world of philanthropy or the bad habits from the business world. So control, KPI, measurement, and all of this. The other misused word is leadership. We know what leadership means, but for me, what's more important is leading from the truth. And what is that? So there is an organization called Service Space that coined the word leadership, and I much prefer that. We are all equal, essentially. We're born equal, and we'll also leave the world equal. And and we are merely steps on the ladder for each other to climb on the consciousness level. If we believe that the only purpose of life on earth is to rise in level of consciousness, then let's internalize that concept. So we all steps and bridges for each other to climb that ladder of consciousness. And I would much prefer to use that word, but yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, and let's unpack that a little bit, right? Because this idea of, okay, rising in a different level of consciousness, in some ways, again, so much of our work is how do we grow this human capacity to drive shifts in our systems, to come to, and I think the language you're using is a new level of consciousness. So break that down for someone who says, I'm not sure, Lam, I know what you mean. Like, what does that look like in practice? So, you talked about interconnectedness, you talked about letting go of ego.
So
Yeah, can you give some examples to bring that to life?
on a very simple level, Um, and it goes to the question of who are we? Who are we? Are we this body? Are we our feelings? Are we our thoughts? Or are we even our personality? And well, we'll keep searching for that answer all life. But we're certainly not our feelings. And most of the time, we are not free in terms of our action. Most of the 95% of the time, we only react. I react to you because you do something to me, and 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 then you react to that, to my reaction, and it keeps going and going, and nothing is solved. Rising in consciousness means be aware that we are not our feelings, we're not our thoughts, we're certainly not our body, because that disintegrates one day. Um, and when we feel that we are about to react to another person's attack, just pause and say, who is reacting? And that is rising in consciousness level. That is looking at the situation from a higher consciousness level. That is a simple way to explain that. But
Yeah, I
of
love
course,
that. I love that, Lam. Like, I mean, I
there is
start imagining a world where, again, if all of us operating all these different sectors in moments when there is tension or conflict, instead of reacting, took a moment to pause and actually thought about from where are we coming from, and we're able to not react, but actually come together. Yeah, what would be possible? That's an amazing thought. And what have you learned about what that takes to develop that capacity? Like, you've worked with many organizations, you've done this work yourself. So if we're saying, okay, well, we want to grow this capacity to operate at a different level of consciousness. We want to grow this capacity to not react to one another, but actually be able to work. We talk about collective leadership, work with one another. We want to develop the capacity to pause and know ourselves to do that. What are the types of things that you've seen, working with different organizations? I know you work with education organizations, social entrepreneurs that are enabling people to build that type of
yeah.
capacity.
So I would like to call that the me, we, us spiritual journey. Other people have different names for that. Um, I learned a new name from Shaheen Mistry, the founder of Teach for India, the other day. Her us is India, is India, but never mind. So it all starts with the me, and that's 80% of the work. Find out who we really are. Are we and all the spiritual traditions in the world, from Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, the Sufis, all of them teach that we're all interconnected and related. We're different but interrelated, and teach the same thing. So find out who we are, and then the inner works. How do we do the inner works? Meditation, mindfulness is one one way, but it's not the only way. I know a good friend of mine, he's the one who has influenced me the most from the spiritual point of view over the last 50 years. He doesn't meditate. His way of meditating is to pick up leaves on in his front yard and backyard. And now he engages in other practices, but sitting down on a cushion has never been one of his practices. So and you try to go on retreats, you can read books, but you can do it through art, you can do it through music. There are many ways. I think the key thing is to get in touch with our inner selves, our true self, and find out who that is. But but spirituality without social engagement, for me, is too self-centered. And on the other hand, social engagement without spirituality is just an exercise in power and a way to nourish the ego. So we need both. That's why we need the me, and we need the we. And I love platforms like Ditro, like Acumen, like Ashoka, because through them you reach lots of people who are themselves change makers, and they go on and change the world in their own way. But we all we all we all energy vibrations. Whether we believe in that or not, but quantum physics has is on its way of demonstrating that. So um, because we're all energy, we have to realize that the energy inside each of us is nothing. Is a tiny fraction of the energy in the universe,
Mm,
of the energy of the universe. And I know that if we, each of us, does our job sincerely and with commitment, the universe will do its job. And the energy of the universe would come in the space between us and guide us to something better and bigger. And that is the us. So the us is the system.
mm. I love that, Lamb. And I love the invitation. I mean, we've been having similar conversations around, what if our education systems were not geared on me, but on we, not on individual achievement, but on our collective good. And so I love the idea that it sounds like what you're suggesting is a real paradigm shift, right? It's really asking us to like, it's not just about leadership on a day-to-day basis, but what's the fundamental orientation with which how we lead? So let me ask you a more challenging question. Um, it might not be challenging, but I think it'll be interesting for the group, right? You are operating in a world of private equity where I can imagine bringing any of this language up would be quite foreign or it might be, quite different. And we are all operating in contexts which demand a lot. Like there's an urgency. We might be overwhelmed. We've got to get things done. And what you're asking us to do is something that's much needed, but actually hard to do in our day to day. It is hard to stop and pause. It is hard to take a few days off to get to know ourselves. If we haven't done that for most of our lives, like it might be very scary to actually do that work. So I'm curious of what you've learned on the journey of doing that. I can not imagine it was easy. I can imagine you probably go in circles where people are saying, wait, that's very weird. So how have you navigated that tension? Because I think that might also give others kind of the courage or advice around, well, how do you do that in a world that's designed in a very different way?
No, it's certainly not a linear path. Um, you make a step forward and two steps back, but you just have to keep going on the journey. And why it's important and why we have to do it. If we look at the world today, there is an unraveling. There are three divides in the world. First, the divide within the self, with the incredible amount of mental health issues, breakdown, um, the number of suicides every year in the world is 700,000, and that far exceeds the total number of deaths from wars, natural disasters, and so on. Second, the divide with society, the obscene amount of inequity in the world, the fragmentation of society with various subgroups not even talking to one another in the same country. And the polarization that we see everywhere. And the third divide is with nature, with species extinctions, the extreme climate changes, all of that. If we continue on this route, we're going to a disaster, and we are continuing on this route because as a planet, we consume 1.6 or 1.7 times the sustainable resources of the planet, but that is only a global average. In the global north, in the west, so the US, Western Europe, we consume like six times. So how to go from 6 times to 1 time. It's tough. It is almost impossible because most of us still want a bigger bank account. Most companies still want bigger, higher sales growth, higher revenue growth, higher profit growth, because the CEOs and the management's bonus is based on that. A lot of countries in the world, with the exception of one, Bhutan, pursues GDP growth, and many government ministers, their bonus is based on GDP growth. So as long as we do, we keep over-consuming, companies will keep overproducing and destroying the planet and each other, exploiting each other as a result. Because we all see one another as as a tool to satisfy our own selfish needs. So that's why we need a paradigm shift. Now, almost all the activities, economic activities in the world are here today. Not all, but a lot of them are here because they're needed. Even banking, even we're not producing toxic chemicals, but a lot of them are needed. So we can continue to do that, but do it differently, do it mindfully, each time asking ourselves, who are we hurting? Are we hurting our our own employees? Are we hurting our customers, our suppliers, our children and future generations? Are we hurting the planet?
Yeah, such big. I mean, in some ways it's so big and yet it's so simple. It's coming back to who we are and what do we value and are we operating by doing
But that
harm?
is very tough. I attended a conference with Christina Figueres, the heroine of of climate. This was 3 years ago. She said, "I don't know why we need COP. What COP are we at today? 29 or something? Uh, it should have been solved like 15, 20 years ago. Let's just get on with it." But companies, governments don't. They keep throwing it and finding excuses, because profit is and money is still the motive.
Yeah.
And the code of money is also also the biggest deep root cause of all our problems today. Because of that, we see one another as merely tools to satisfy our own needs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think that's why we need that
wealth
very.
is wealth is something that we can share with others. So time, compassion, wisdom, contacts, not only money. Nobody would argue if you say that Mother Teresa was one of the biggest philanthropists of all times, although she had no money. And if we shift paradigm and and see all of us as one and interrelated, it would be a world of abundance. There are enough resources in the world for everyone.
Yeah, I love this. I love this, Lamb. So now I'm going to ask one more challenging question that often comes up in these spaces. And then I'm going to actually open it up to the group. So all of you, if you have questions, just name in the chat. I can call on you or put your question in the chat. So Lambs, we've got these three big challenges, right? You talked about the challenge of self, where, I mean, the massive number of suicides, the disconnection, the challenges in our society, mass polarization. I think many of us are facing this in our countries, war, conflict, and then a complete disconnection with our planet, overconsumption. We're utilizing resources. We're not sure if it's going to be there. So this is massive systemic problems. And now what you're saying is actually we need a paradigm shift in each of us. So how do we connect the dots? So, Lam, if you are doing that inner work, I know that alone won't change the system. Maybe if a few of us are like, how do we connect the dots between the massive, massive systemic issues And what you're saying is the biggest intervention we can have is the changing the way that each of us is operating the system. What will it take to actually see shifts at scale? What's your bet on that?
Um, Thank you. It's a excellent but very complex question. It all starts with ourselves, as I said, but I'm encouraged by a lot of factors. First of all, this code of money has not always been the case. Has not always been the case. It started in Western Europe 500 years ago, when Francis Bacon said science should torture nature's secrets out of her and make it into a slave for human needs. We still do that today. Descartes, the French philosopher, said the purpose of science is to make ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. And we're still continuing on that path today with capitalism, colonialism, and neo. We still slavery, which still continues today in a different form, and all that. But that has not always been the case. The indigenous traditions everywhere, they all have their problems. The civilizations of the East all had their problems and their flaws, and we should not go back to them. But at least they recognize the corrupting power of money. So um, the Confucian societies, China, Vietnam, Korea, uh, for instance, the scholars who knew the scriptures were at the top, and the merchants were at the bottom. Even in India, the Vaishyas, the merchants, were near the bottom, and the Brahmins were at the top. Now, the execution of a lot of these philosophies is wrong. And that's why in India you have Buddhism and all that. But at least at least they knew that they knew about the corrupting power of money, and that had to be reined in. There is an Indian proverb which I love. It says, "When money is not a servant, it is a master." And today it is a master. So we need to change the paradigm in that way. So and that's
And I appreciate, Lam, the work that you're doing in that space, like in the space of philanthropy, to have these bold, courageous conversations around these questions, which I think we need leadership at all levels in all sectors asking the hard, bold questions. So yeah, appreciate what you're doing there, Lam. Well, I'm going to ask you one last question and then I'm going to open it up to the group. So just put up your hand if you have a question. But there's so much happening in the world. Lam, where are you at? Like, have you lost hope or do you feel hopeful? And
yeah.
what leans you in one direction or the other?
I'm very optimistic for a variety of reasons. Some friends who are astrology scholars say that we are entering the age of Aquarius. The problem, and age of Aquarius is characterized by innovation, so technology, humanitarianism, universality. So all these good values that many of us aspire to. The problem is each age is like 2,100 years, and nobody is sure when it will start or whether it has started. More precise is the work of somebody I follow, is an American philosopher called Ken Wilber, and based on the works of psychologists over the last 100 years, he has observed that whenever the leading edge of spiritual evolution reaches 10% of mankind, something big happens. So in the 18th century, we moved from what they call the mythical stage to the rational stage, where we have the advent of modern sciences, the abolition of slavery, human rights. So big things happening. The next stage did not happen until the 1960s, when we had the hippies, the protests against the wars, the student movements, civil rights movement, feminist rights, the Korean movement. So again, big things. Now, some people believe that the next stage, they call it the integral stage, might happen in the 2030s. And what are the early signs of that? The the fact that over the last 20 years, the increase in employment in civil society, NGOs, social enterprises, etc., has been 4 times the increase in employment in the for-profit sector, from a low base, but it still continues. Movements like the humanitarian business movement, like Paul Pullman's net positive movement, or the B Corp movement. J. Cohn Gilbert was one of the co-founder of B Lab, which is at the foundation of B Corp. And he said something remarkable. He said, the current extractive and exploitative economy is not designed for the benefit of all. The source code error that runs the operating system is called shareholder supremacy. So everything else flows from that source code. So whatever we're doing is going to run up against that edge. And unless we rewrite the source code, a paradigm shift, in other words, nothing will change other than marginally. We need to transition from what he called the slave economy to the sacred economy with the heart at the center. And in Davos last year, somebody talked about the moral economy for the first time. Who can believe that? The increasing popularity of mindfulness practices in the West is, somebody estimated that over the last 15 years, it has doubled from 7.5% to 15%. And yeah.
This is incredible. Yeah.
And paradoxically, I think concurrent triumph of very divisive leaders and very selfish leaders all at the same time is a good sign. Is a good sign because it shows an acceleration of the unraveling. We need to hit bottom to go up again. It's like in a birth, the mother goes through a lot of pain, but soon after the birth, she forgets about the pain and comes a new life. So I hope that this is the same thing.
Yeah.
And I also have hope in the next gen. Because they want to live in a in a world not based on competition, based on cooperation, on unity. I just give two real stories. So 2 years ago, I gave a talk at a conference in Bali, and there was a lady who came up to me afterwards. She said, "What you said, what you share, resonates a lot with me. My family wants me to be involved in our family business." I said, "No." My family wants me to be involved in our family foundation work. I also said no. I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because the money is tainted." So it's very serious stuff. So we had a cup of coffee, and I said, "Why don't you try to change from the inside, and convince your parents to change the way of operating?" She said, "I did try, but as long as my father is still alive, he's not going to change." So I said, "But you still benefit from that 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 wealth, your lifestyle still does." And she said, "Yes, I know, but one day, hopefully soon, I will pick up the courage and say to my parents, I love you, but this has got to stop." Another real story. I see that my partner Conrad is co-founder of the business, is with me. So at the peak, our business had 100 professionals. What we do is growth equity is not leverage buyout, so we don't buy companies, finance it with debt, and then in order to pay the debt and make the return, we need to fire 1,000 people. We grow with with the the companies and the economies. Still, out of these 100 people, maybe they had 200, I don't know, 200 plus children. Only 4 work in banking or finance. So maybe they saw the heels and the wounds in their parents. Maybe they saw their lifestyle and they say, we don't want any of that. Last month, I attended a conference in India, and there was a dialogue session with the next gen, and there was this beautiful family. They're in the business. The second gen person forbids his children to work in the business because he was forced to work in the business. He does not want. He wants his children to have a choice. And a third gen person at the conference said something beautiful. You cannot build something with one hand and destroy it with the other hand. You cannot do damage to the world and at the same time do philanthropy.
Wow. Yeah, such a powerful statement, Lam, around yeah, living your values, like really living
Living
in
living our values. So do it for our children, even if they don't tell us that what we're doing is wrong. So last week, or was it 10 days ago, I had the privilege of attending the Teach for All inaugural global forum for shaping a better future. And um, looking around after talking to just hundreds of people, I felt that it was not 10% of leading edge in that room. It was like 50% of that room.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lam, for giving us hope in a moment when I think all we see in the news is bad news, and it can be very easy to center on that. It's actually so great to have that hope and remind ourselves that yes, like a small group of people who are very committed can actually change things. So really, really appreciate you giving us some hope. My morning, other people's evening. It's a beautiful message to think about. That's oftentimes counter to what we're hearing. I think there's some great questions in the chat, so I'm going to open it up because I'd love to make this a conversation. Deborah, if you wouldn't mind just coming off of mute and sharing your question, and then we'll go to Conrad and anyone else who has a question. Yeah, let's keep this an open conversation. So Deborah, if we can hear from you, your question.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I must say, definitely inspired me quite a bit. Working in my field in education, I'm often asked by the next generation about how to navigate these challenging times across the globe and to stay inspired, and especially when it seems like everything is just in chaos. So I'd love to hear from you, Lam, on your thoughts of your biggest piece of advice for young people to help them avoid despair and instead embrace this notion of being change makers and having positive social impact.
Um, yes, just well, education has a big role in this. 30 years ago, UNICEF came out with this framework of the 4 pillars of education: learning knowledge, learning skills to apply this knowledge, and learning how to be and learning how to live in society. And most of our effort in education has been about learning knowledge and learning skills. And we've been neglecting the other 2 pillars, learning how to be and learning how to live in society. But the first 2 pillars is about jobs. It's about because education for hundreds of years is about producing managers and workers for the capitalist economy. I say capitalist, but it's really the materialist economy because it's everywhere. It's the same now. And we've been neglecting the other two pillars, and that's why we're having all these problems. So we need we need to change that paradigm from the teachers, from the parents, from well, and we need to cultivate other actors in the field, like policymakers, government, funders, that they should pay attention to others. 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, I visited Bihar, which is the most the poorest state in India, and we visited several classrooms, and they have these what they call project-based learning, and it was a program designed by people from either alums from Teach for India or the Gandhi Fellowship, which are the great incubators of change makers. And there was such an amount of energy in the room, and we asked them, the students, so how do you learn? Is that we learn from talking to our friends, we learn from talking to our teachers, we also learn from Google, from YouTube, and all that. I said, do you have access to a computer? No. Do you have access to a phone? Yes, I have access to my mom's phone. Do you have enough internet access? And this 12-year-old girl said, yes, it's enough. And anyway, I do not want to be more friends with my phone. I want to be more friends with my friends here in this classroom. Such a mature answer from a 12-year-old, very poor child. And we need to encourage that. And the way to do it is do it with love. That's the spirit of the Teach For movement. I think it's too early to assess the impact on the recipients, but it is certainly the premier incubator of change makers in the world, because for 2 years, the fellows go out of the way and give love to each of their students. And that pays, because love begets love.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Lam. I think sometimes we talk about leadership and very technical skills, but oftentimes it's knowing ourselves, offering love and compassion. So thank you, Deborah, for that beautiful question. Let me turn it over to a very different question. Conrad, if you don't mind coming off mute and just sharing, yeah, your name, your question, and then others. We still have room for a few more, so feel free to put up your hand or put a question in the chat. Let's keep this conversation going. Conrad.
Yeah, my name is Nguyen-Phuong. Hi, Lam. First of all, good to see you.
Hi, Conrad.
Um, I love your talk about learning from the past. And I have a practical question. You lived the majority, as you said, of your life on the dark side. With what you feel and what you know today, after all this journey you are doing, if you had the opportunity to go back 40 years ago and still having your career, which has been a very successful career, what would you have done differently?
We don't need to go into into details, but overall, I think what I did, so investing in emerging markets, in growth equity in emerging markets was a good thing, because we helped companies grow, we helped create employment, we helped, and with that we produce return up to a certain point for our clients. What I would have done differently, I would not have invested in certain sectors, fossil fuel, all of this stuff. We should do all we can to stop encouraging or nurturing this system that is killing us and our children. So use the ship rather than ownership. make products that last longer, that kind of thing. I also would not take money from some of our clients. People say, "Oh, but it's these are retirees. They're they're just people who need the pension money." I said, "That's fine, but when they were working, they were producing toxic chemicals, they were processing bombs. We should not encourage such activities."
Thank you, Lam. Thanks. Yeah, and um it's always good to be reflective on the things that worked. But yeah, have the courage to be reflective on the things that we would do differently. So appreciate your honesty here, Lam. I've got
But
two
as
more.
I say, most activities in the world today are there for a reason, and they're still needed. It just needs to be done differently. A friend of mine just retired. I asked him, "Do you invest in palm oil?" He said, "Yes. Depends with whom."
Hmm.
And and he went into details. Said, with such and such company, yes. With such and such company, never, because the way they do it is unethical and destroy nature. And the man is a master at twisting the law to benefit himself.
Hmm. Yeah, who matters a lot. That's a good point, Lam. Thinking about who do we work with? That's an important question. There's two great questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to, and so I'm going to go right to them. Nagma from Afghanistan. Nagma, if you're with us and you can just share who you are and yeah, your question in the chat, and then Wendy, I'll turn it over to you after that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Radha. Hi, Lam. It was an honor meeting you in Singapore at the Global Forum, and I was going through your thoughts on the consciousness, evolution, and education. So I would like to know your thoughts or opinion about what role the educators and youth leaders especially play in accelerating this shift toward the integral stage that Ken Wilber talked about, and also you mentioned about it. So please share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are very honored to journey with Teach for All in this inner leadership for system change, to help equip the leaders and teachers of the various Teach for organizations around the world, with the spiritual guidance to help them with the work. We also help journey with. When I say help journey with, it's not only give money to, but advise and help with growing the organization that are engaged in like social, emotional, and ethical learning, or CBCT, which stands for compassion-based cognitive training. So trying to train the trainers to teach compassion to students, young and adult.
Yeah, I love that, Lam. And so that you, so
Great.
you,
Thank you so much.
and you see the power of young people, right? It sounds like
Yeah.
you really believe in the power of young people in this. Do you see them as a critical part in this? You talked about this integral stage in the next transformation. Like, how big a role do you see young people playing in that piece?
Major.
Yeah.
Because the mindset is different.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. But less unlearning to do and more bringing a different paradigm from the outset.
A lot of well, I belong to all of these. I have to use the word philanthropist circles, and a lot of them, of the members, when talking about the next gen, complain that the next gen are not that engaged. But talking to some of them, I understand why, because they see the disconnect between the economic activities and the philanthropic activities.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good point when when we hear not engaged to actually ask the question, what's beneath that? Because I've had a similar experience when you actually look at young people, they do have a completely different energy, and the ability to change things. So another reason for hope, which is nice in today's world. Let me turn it over to you, Wendy, and if you want to just voice over your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lam and Radha. This is such a beautiful conversation. Lam, I'm just really curious. Like, you've obviously been through such a transformational kind of personal journey. Um, and I've been thinking a lot, I mean, in this people first community, as well as we try to unpack each other's understandings about what it really takes to develop the leadership we need, about just this question of what you can do through introspection and coaching and, kind of intellectual and personal, reflection, et cetera. Um, and and what is the balance between that and real lived experience, working in proximity with the world's greatest injustices and inequities? And I'm asking that because I keep being sort of, I don't know, it's very present for us across the Teach for All network, just how transformative across so many different contexts and cultures with different forms of professional development, this experience of committing 2 years to teach in the most under-resourced communities is. It's almost like no matter where you are, it shifts you in very similar ways. And it's made me wonder whether sometimes in the leadership development world, we oversimplify like what it takes to drive that level of transformation. And yet I'm listening to you and realizing you have gone through such a powerful transformational journey. So I'm just curious how you think about like really what has gone into that for you, or what does that usually take?
Thank you, Wendy. Great question. So I go because we do support a lot of platforms because of the multiplier effect, and I go around saying that Teach for All is the premier incubator of change makers in the world, more so than any of the other platforms that that we are involved with. But so attending the retreat last year, and then attending the Global Forum and interacting with the leaders and some of the fellows, the former fellows, understand why. Because of the teaching job. Because the other NGOs, so they elect or help social entrepreneurs, change makers, and then they it's a bit random what these social entrepreneurs and change makers do in the world. Some do great things, not so great things, but it's fairly random. Whereas with the Teach For organization, because of the 2-year experience dealing with the very underprivileged, marginalized children, and do it with a spirit of love. The way Shaheen describes, Shaheen, and not only Shaheen, but all her alums describe what their stories, is just amazing. And that is transformative. So you need both. You need both. We because without spirituality, it's not sustainable. During COVID, I know a few civil society leaders who have gone into mental hospital because they saw the fruit of their work for the last 20 years disappear overnight because of COVID. If they had inner works, they would have been able to sustain that. So inner works is key, but without the interaction, what I call love, it's not real. It can easily turn into an exercise in power and a nourishment for the ego. And the ego is extremely clever and powerful, it can change form and lure you into spirituality too.
Thank you, Lam.
Yeah, and I think there's so many other organizations in this people first community who are doing like what we've talked about here, which is actually being really proximate, like having young people, whether it's in healthcare or education, being proximate. But I love what you said, Lam, that that's the core of it, doing the work of service and to ensure that we don't lose our way and that we have that opportunity to reflect and do that in the most powerful way, creating these spaces for introspection and inner works is necessary, and to confront the elements of power and everything that we'll be dealing with as we're doing social change. You need both. So I love that. And I think it's one of the things we've been learning in this community. How do we hold two things that could feel in tension, actually recognize both are needed? So I like that provocation.
So of course, I love the idea of people first, because people must come first. But let's, but because we say that, let's not forget that the us, the me, the we. Let's not forget the us, because the energy in the universe is much more powerful than the energy within each of us. And that would, if we unleash that energy, it would carry us to much bigger things.
Well, what a beautiful way to end a call, to not be thinking about just each of us individually, but us as a unit. I think that's such a embodiment of what we're trying to do here, which is the sum of all of us is greater than each one of us alone. Thank you so much, Lam, for being with us. What inspiration this was, and a reminder to stay optimistic in the face of all the challenges. So really grateful to you for everyone who is here today. And yeah, we're looking forward to our next series of talks. We have another one coming up this summer with John Canny of the Collective Change Lab and Laura Calderon, where we'll be talking about the healing work of systems change and everything that we've learned there, and a few more to come. So look out for the recording from this talk and the notes, and you're welcome to share that. If any of you have other ideas of people who we should have in the space, please reach out. And thanks again, Lam. What a great conversation.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Take care.
So great. Thank you so much, Lam and Radha. So appreciate